Yoonseol stands in the funeral hall, grieving the loss of her parents. With them gone, her grandfather is the only family she has left, so she always tries to do as he wishes. One day, she discovers by chance that he has late-stage pancreatic cancer. Realizing their time together is short, she learns his greatest wish is to see her walk down the aisle, to see her married before he passes. At school, she can't stop thinking about her grandfather's wish for her to get married. She knows he's worried about her, but one question keeps nagging at her: isn't she too young for marriage? Distracted, she's busy on her phone when her friend approaches, inviting her to lunch. Instead of answering, she grabs his hand and pulls him aside. Startled by her serious expression, he quickly apologizes, assuming he's upset her. But to his shock, she suddenly stops and asks, "Seok-hyun, would you marry me?" He's visibly shocked at first, but then he hugs her and agrees, joking that they should marry when they're 30. Before she can explain, his phone rings, cutting their conversation short. He promises to talk more the next day, but she waves it off, laughing it off as a joke. Smiling, he says goodbye and walks away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Lost in her musings, she accidentally bumps into someone. Just as she opens her mouth to apologize, the stranger snaps at her, warning her to watch where she's going. Irritated, she fires back, her voice rising as she scolds him. Caught up in her anger, she doesn't notice a car speeding toward her. In a flash, he grabs her arm and pulls her out of harm's way. The sudden movement causes them to stumble, their bodies pressing together and their lips brushing accidentally. A second later, they pull away, both awkwardly mumbling apologies. Flustered, Yoonseol quickly walks off, eager to put distance between them. Before she's out of earshot, the guy calls after her, asking if she's going to compensate him for the kiss. Stunned, she turns around and snaps, reminding him that their lips barely touched. "What, have you never kissed anyone before?" she retorts, glaring at him before continuing on her way. "What makes you think someone like me hasn't kissed before?" he fires back, smirking. Yoonseol tries to brush off the incident, calling it an accident, but he insists she still hasn't thanked him for saving her. Their banter goes back and forth until she finally turns to leave, warning him not to talk to her again if they ever cross paths. The next day, Yoonseol sits in the classroom with her friends, Seok-hyun among them. They're chatting casually when the professor enters, followed by a young man. The professor introduces him as a guest lecturer who will be teaching their entrepreneurship course for the semester. The man steps forward, introducing himself as Kong Jun-young. His face strikes a chord of recognition in Yoonseol's mind. She narrows her eyes, trying to piece it together, and then it hits her. This new lecturer is none other than the irritating guy she ran into yesterday. While Yoonseol hides her face behind a book, the other girls in the class can't stop gushing over the handsome new lecturer. Her mind, however, is consumed by the memory of their accidental kiss. The thought makes her cringe so hard that she bites the edge of her book in frustration. Still reeling from her embarrassment, she freezes when the lecturer points directly at her. "You," he says, "what's your name?" Heart pounding, she nervously stammers, "I'm Choi Yoonseol, sir." The entire class turns to look at her, and her cheeks burn under their gaze. Without missing a beat, Kong Jun-young flips through his book and then asks, "Can you explain the content on this page?" After class ends, a girl confidently approaches the new lecturer. "Why didn't you tell me earlier that you'd be teaching here?" she asks, her tone light and familiar. She even invites him out for coffee, but Kong Jun-young politely declines. "It's inappropriate for a professor and student to have coffee together," he replies firmly. When the other students notice Sujin speaking with the lecturer, they exchange curious glances, surprised that she seems to know him. Sensing their interest, Sujin casually explains, "Our families know each other. I just found out he's a guest lecturer here." Meanwhile, outside the classroom, Yoonseol's friend, Jae-eun, approaches her. "Want to grab a meal?" she asks with a cheerful smile. But Yoonseol shakes her head, offering a weak smile. "I can't. I'm not feeling well, so I'm heading straight home." As Kong Jun-young, now referred to as Mr. Kong, exits the premises, she hurries after him, eager to speak. She apologizes for their rocky first meeting and asks him not to bring their personal issues into the classroom. He calmly reassures her that he keeps his personal matters separate from his role as a professor, acting only as an advisor to his students. With that, he turns and walks away. Later that day, Yoonseol has a phone call with her grandfather. They exchange warm greetings before he tells her he's heading to Seoul to meet the son of a close friend. He invites her to join him and promises to pick her up. The next day, Yoonseol accompanies her grandfather to meet the children of his friend, who had also been close to her late parents. Kang Tae-jin and Hae-suk, now the heads of the successful TJ Corp., greet them warmly. After brief introductions, Kang Tae-jin apologizes for not reaching out to her after her parents passed away, but Hae-suk quickly cuts him off, reminding him not to spoil the cheerful moment with sad remarks. Kang Tae-jin then lightens the mood by offering to take Yoonseol as his child and jokingly mentions giving her cute siblings, hinting at the fact he only has sons. Moments later, their second son arrives to greet the guests, followed by their eldest, who, to Yoonseol's surprise, is none other than Kang Jun-young. As they walk together, Kang Jun-young comments that he never thought they'd meet again and jokingly calls it fate. Yoonseol nervously laughs and suggests they start fresh. She thanks him for saving her the other day and apologizes, but he quickly counters, reminding her that she claimed not to remember it at the time. She admits, "Yes, I remember everything. I was the one who made a mistake back then, sir." At her formal tone, he cuts in, telling her to call him Jun-young outside of class so they can speak more casually. She hesitates, pointing out that he's older and far more experienced than she is. Her remark makes him pause, his expression shifting to curiosity. "Are you talking about the first kiss experience?" he asks, a teasing edge in his voice. He then adds, "For the record, I've only felt it once, unlike you. Who's had it 108 times? Fuming, Yoonseol snaps that he's truly annoying and warns him to be careful if he ever calls her out in class again, explaining that her behavior is because of her grandfather and his parents. After a brief standoff, both of them storm off in opposite directions, still angry. The next day at school, Jae-eun leans in and whispers to Yoonseol, suggesting that the new lecturer seems to have feelings for her. Yoonseol doesn't argue, simply agreeing that those feelings are more likely anger. Just then, Sujin chimes in, claiming that she knows the lecturer likes women who are smart and elegant. Without thinking, Yoonseol blurts out that he's not her type, adding that while she's looking for a potential husband, Mr. Kang Jun-young will never make the cut. Left alone, Jae-eun, still surprised, asks if Yoonseol is genuinely looking for a potential husband or if she's just saying that. Yoonseol responds firmly, assuring her friend that she's serious. She explains that she's been trying to meet someone through dating apps and even asked Seo-kyun, but he thought she was joking. Jae-eun suggests she try a blind date instead and promises to reach out to her aunt, who runs a matchmaking agency, to set something up for Saturday. On the day of the date, Yoonseol arrives at the hotel, only to have a man walk up to her. At that moment, she realizes just how difficult it is to find the right man. Her date arrives, apologizing for being late, but quickly shifts to bragging about his looks. Over several Saturdays, she goes on more dates, but none lead anywhere. Meanwhile, across the lobby during her current date, Mr. Kang is on a call with his mother. He abruptly ends the call when a young woman approaches, calling his name. They chat briefly before Mr. Kang wraps up their conversation. Back at Yoonseol's table, her date, who initially seems decent, suddenly becomes aggressive. Their argument escalates, catching Kang Jun-young's attention. He steps in, pulls the man away, and sends him off with a chilling glare. Taking Yoonseol by the hand, he leads her aside and asks if she's there for a blind date. She curtly responds that it's none of his business. She slumps into the chair, her shoulders heavy, and explains that her grandfather is ill, and she's just trying to fulfill his final wish. She goes on to say that after meeting so many men on blind dates, she's realized love isn't a priority for her anymore. Her grandfather's happiness matters most, and all she needs is the status of being married. He listens quietly, then sits down across from her, studying her for a moment before suggesting, "Then just marry me." Silence fills the air as Yoonseol stares at him, trying to process his words. A second later, she bursts into laughter, shaking her head in disbelief. "Why would it have to be you?" she asks, still laughing. "Because we meet each other's criteria," he replies calmly. "It's practical for both of us. Our families already know each other, and your grandfather would be happy and at peace if you married me." Still skeptical, she narrows her eyes and asks, "What's in it for you?" He shrugs lightly and says, "Just as you need the status of a wife, I only need the status of a husband." It hits her that he must have come to the hotel for a blind date too. The weight of his proposal isn't something she can decide on lightly, so she asks for time to think it over. He agrees but tells her, "I'll wait for you in the parking lot where we first met, 3 days from now at 5 p.m. If you don't show up, I'll take it as your answer." 3 days later, he waits in the parking lot. When the clock ticks past 5:10, he sighs and decides to leave. As he reaches for his car door, Yoonseol's voice calls out behind him, her tone urgent. "Wait. Please." He turns to see her running toward him, breathless and apologetic. "I'm sorry I'm late. My class ended later than I expected," she explains. She glances at him nervously. "I guess my being here means I'm not rejecting your offer. But I have one condition." He raises an eyebrow, curious. "I want the marriage to stay a secret until I graduate. If the campus finds out, it could ruin everything for me," she says firmly. He nods without hesitation. "Deal." And they shake hands to seal the agreement. That evening, Young sits down for dinner with his family and announces he's going to marry Choi Yoonseol. His father and younger brother are thrilled, but his mother questions his decision, no matter how much he tries to reassure her. She isn't convinced he truly loves Yoonseol. Still doubtful, she insists he bring her over again so she can speak to her. Meanwhile, Yoonseol is shouting in disbelief when she hears Young's mom wants to talk to her. She never imagined this would happen and now fears his mother might suspect something. Young calms her down, telling her not to worry and to stick to their plan. The next day, Yoonseol visits Young's house and finds herself alone with his mother. His mother starts by mentioning that Young has already told them about their plans to marry. She then asks Yoonseol if she's sure about getting married so soon, especially since she's still in college. She replies explaining that they've agreed to keep the marriage a secret until she graduates, so it won't interfere with her studies. Intrigued, his mother bombards her with questions, leaving her feeling overwhelmed. After a brief pause, his mother softens and clarifies that she didn't call her over out of dislike. She simply wants to understand. Finally, she asks, "Do you really love Young?" Yoonseol smiles and nods, trying to sound convincing as she assures Young's mother. Then, his mother asks if her son truly loves her too. Yoonseol freezes, unsure how to respond, but before she can say anything, Young enters the room. Without hesitation, he declares his love for her, pulling her into a hug and calling her sweet names to further convince his mother. Later, as Young drives Yoonseol home, they argue about his over-the-top performance. She accuses him of being ridiculous, but he defends himself, saying it was the only way to make his mother believe. He adds that love isn't just about words, it's also about body language, and she needs to act more naturally. When they arrive, Yoonseol thanks him for the ride. Just as she's about to get out, he takes her hand, kisses it, and insists they need more practice to appear like a genuine couple. He leans in, ready for another attempt, but she shoves him away, quickly getting out of the car. Walking off, she wonders if it's already too late to back out of this charade. Almost immediately, Yoonseol's phone rings. It's her grandfather, calling to confirm the news about her and Young's upcoming marriage. His voice overflows with excitement as he suggests a wedding venue and mentions that her aunt can take care of all the arrangements. Listening to him, Yoonseol realizes that things have gone too far for her to back out now. With a resigned determination, she heads back to the car. Meeting Junyoung's gaze, she decides to embrace the act. They share a passionate kiss, supposedly a practice for their wedding kiss, sealing the moment and their resolve. The next day at school, Yoonseol quietly observes her friends, trying to decide who she can trust with her secret marriage. Sujin is prone to jealousy and loves to subtly put others down. Seokyun, with his loud mouth, would spread the news across campus in no time. Jaeyoung-eun, though sarcastic and somewhat distant, seems like the safest choice. Later, Yoonseol and Jaeyoung-eun are walking together when Jaeyoung-eun mentions she's heading to the cafe in front of the campus and asks if Yoonseol wants to join. To her surprise, Yoonseol agrees. Jaeyoung-eun raises an eyebrow, noting how unusual it is since she usually heads to the library. Yoonseol hesitates for a moment before admitting she has something important to share. They find a quieter spot, and Yoonseol finally confesses, "I'm going to marry Mr. Kong Junyoung." Jaeyoung-eun stares at her, stunned, before exclaiming that she always suspected they were secretly dating. Yoonseol explains that the marriage is mainly for her grandfather's sake and asks her to keep it a secret. Jaeyoung-eun congratulates her for finding a way out of her situation but then, with curiosity, asks why Mr. Kong would propose such a marriage and if he has any hidden motives. Yoonseol responds that he doesn't want to waste time dating to find a wife and, like her, he needs the status that comes with it. As they continue talking, Seokyun suddenly barges in, startling both of them. His unexpected appearance forces them to quickly change their plans, deciding on a different meal to eat. Meanwhile, Mr. Kang sits alone in a cafe, quietly sipping his coffee when Sujin walks in. They exchange a few words, and not long after, the other three friends walk into the cafe. Seokyun immediately senses their presence, waves at Sujin, and heads over to greet Mr. Kong. He casually invites them to join him and his friends for a meal. As Seokyun speaks, Yoonseol subtly gestures to Mr. Kong, urging him to decline the offer, but to her disappointment, he accepts. When they sit down to eat, the table falls into an awkward silence. To break it, Seokyun offers Yoonseol some half-cooked eggs to pair with her meal. He casually mentions that Yoonseol is from Jeoj Island, where it's common to eat with egg on top. After a while, Mr. Kong asks Yoonseol if she used to live in Jeoj and when she moved to Seoul. Before she can answer, Seokyun jumps in, answering on her behalf. Watching the two banter, Sujin raises an eyebrow and speculates that they might be dating, but both Yoonseol and Seokyun quickly deny it, assuring her that they're just very close friends. Once their meal is over, Seokyun and Sujin leave first, followed by Jaeyoung-eun, leaving Yoonseol and Mr. Kong behind. Taking the opportunity, Yoonseol asks him why he agreed to Seokyun's invitation. He replies that they agreed to keep their relationship a secret on campus, but that doesn't mean they aren't familiar with each other. He adds that he's simply acting naturally in front of his students. As he stands up to leave, he stretches out his hand toward Yoonseol, inviting her to his car and reminding her that they need to practice at every opportunity. With no other choice, she takes his hand and follows him. Wanna know how the marriage turns out? Be sure to catch the next episode, it's going to be exciting.